June of 1918, with American troops now fighting in Europe, Debs spoke to a socialist gathering in Canton, Ohio. In this, his most famous speech, he outlined the socialist opposition to the war and gave his unqualified support to the Russian Revolution, which had just taken place under the leadership of Lenin and Trotsky. This was also the speech for which he was sentenced to jail.
In the Middle Ages, the feudal lords and barons, the economic predecessors of the capitalists of our day, declared all wars, and their miserable serfs fought all the battles. The poor, ignorant serfs had been taught to revere their masters, to believe that when their masters declared war upon one another, it was their patriotic duty to fall upon each other and to cut one another's throats for the profit and glory of the lords and barons who held them in contempt. And that is war in a nutshell. It hasn't changed. The master class has always declared the wars. The subject class has always fought the battles. The master class has had all to gain and nothing to lose, while the subject class has had nothing to gain and all to lose, especially their lives. The ruling class has always taught and trained you to believe it to be your patriotic duty to go to war and to have yourself slaughtered at their command. But in all the history of the world, you, the people, have never had a voice in declaring war. And strange as it certainly appears, no war by any nation in any age has ever been declared by the people. And here let me emphasize the fact, and it cannot be repeated too often, that the working class who fight all the battles, the working class who make the supreme sacrifices, the working class who freely shed their blood and furnish the corpses, have never yet had a voice in either declaring war or making peace. It is the ruling class that invariably does both. They alone declare war, and they alone make peace. Yours not to reason why, yours but to do or die. This is their motto, and we object on the part of the awakening workers of this nation.
2 weeks after he gave his Canton, Ohio speech, Gene Debs was
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show, special Thursday edition, Thursday casual as hell edition of the Michael Brooks Show. We are back in 2019, and we are in Brooklyn, where left is best, as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
And super producer David Slavic, roaming the digitosphere and the ever-expanding TMBS universe. Crew Bhaskar Sunkara joins us today. We're talking about socialism in America, the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution, the differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and why they matter, but also what sets them apart from everybody else in the democratic field. We have a shout out as Haiti celebrates its Independence Day, on New Year's. This incredibly important nation founded on slave liberation and revolution. We'll touch on that. We got to make Numeki Konst public advocate in New York City, and I'll tell you exactly how we can help make this DSA candidate win. We have a global update, a labor uprising, which has been and continues to be ruthlessly suppressed in Sudan, has its roots in austerity, liberalization, and right-wing social politics. The backlash from students and labor unions is inspiring. Brazil inaugurates a fascist, and Western fascists celebrate. Mike Pompeo was there. Nikki Haley tweeted her congratulations, along with, of course, the tremendously stupid president of the United States. But the opposition is strong and durable in Brazil. We'll touch on that. We have a Griscom economic update. We have a huge amount of sound and video to get to in the post-game. Republicans, man, AOC makes them hurt. Whew. Democratic progressives, not AOC and not Rashida Tlaib, fold on pay-go but there are hearings set to be heard on Medicare for All as a new energy ascends in Washington, an energy from us, as exemplified by AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and more. All that on the Michael Brooks Show. First one of 2019 will be back to regular schedule on Tuesday next week. Let's talk about the difference between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. It's a deep difference, and it's a difference that does not force us into petty battles, stupid personal attacks, false equivalencies, or the sort of general mire and pettiness of how these campaigns play out. I've said before, I like and respect Elizabeth Warren, and of course I really like and respect Bernie Sanders. I'm a democratic socialist. I'm not a liberal progressive, although I do respect that tradition, and I certainly respect much of Elizabeth Warren's work. There's a fundamental philosophical difference here which goes to the heart of how we want to do politics. But first, we should register and continue to register that even the possibility of a race between these two is a pitting of two good things against each other, which is an incredible departure in modern American politics. But let's talk about this. With an impending and happening now climate catastrophe, the global rise of fascism, from Trump to Modi, from Bolsonaro to Duterte, from Netanyahu to Orban, we are facing the very real conditions of what people have predicted in concrete and tangible ways of a late-stage capitalism. The resources are shrinking. Globalization and technology have, in fact, for capital, collapsed borders, increased efficiencies, and generated frictionless supply chains, which have made certain consumer processes easier than ever and greatly harmed labor, living standards, work-life balance, and ecology across the globe. The old arrangements of the liberal consensus, the centrist consensus, is dead. It's not coming back. Period. We have an opportunity now to evolve into a better world where we can actually solve our predicaments and generate human flourishing, or we can descend into full barbarism and fascism. But we will not go back to a sliver of time that existed in a highly specific context of a post-World War II and then neoliberal Western-led order. It's not coming back. And at the core of what's not coming back is a mistake and a distinction between socialists and liberals and many Democrats. See, they believe that companies do bad things because they're run by bad people. We as socialists understand that companies do bad things because our economic system incentivizes them to do so. Literally, there's no other way. When the choice is between ecological destruction, worker abuse, or profit, publicly traded corporations must opt for profit and abuse. And that is why those who are out there spreading the gospel of ethical or socially responsible capitalism sounded totally incoherent compared to the ruthless son of a bitches bastards who talked about promoting capitalism at all costs. They were more coherent. Of course, the fantasies spread by Milton Friedman and the Koch brothers and others that a world totally deregulated, a world of corporate feudalism would somehow lead to enhanced broader human well-being was a complete ultimate lie and fantasy. But in general, when you really pin those people down, they'll say that the bottom line is profit for a small group of people at the expense of the many and the ecology. That's coherent to capitalism and incompatible with the survival of the human species. So we need an analysis that fixes our problems at their root and doesn't merely just rearrange the chairs in the deck of the Titanic. And in this analogy, the Titanic is Earth, where the living systems that we all depend on, as well as, of course, our ethical obligations to other species that we are wiping off the face of the planet, is precisely what is in question. It's important that we understand politics, that we understand this for politics as a whole, and of course also for the 2020 election, which unfortunately for many, but in reality, is potentially the most important global political event of our time. Potentially. Maybe we'll invent something better. We need to learn from the great American revolutionary and Bernie Sanders hero Eugene Debs in this process. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Debs now. He was a labor activist who was influential in leading the Pullman strike, which shut down railroads in Chicago in response to workers being given a pay cut of 28%. The army was sent to quell the rebellion on behalf of private industry. Remember that. Debs was called an enemy of the human race by the New York Times in their typically enlightened editorial legacy. One could only imagine what Barry Weiss would think about him. He was sent to prison for his role in organizing the strike. In prison, Debs became a socialist after reading Marxist theory. He ran for president multiple times, but in 1912 was his most successful run, winning 6% of the vote. And many of his ideas migrated in reformed but significant ways into the New Deal. As a socialist leader, he railed against U.S. involvement in World War I and was sent to prison and was disenfranchised for life in one of those actual suppressions of free speech and expression in American history. In fact, the root of the disastrous decision of, I believe it was shouting fire in a crowded theater, had to do with those promoting a pacifist position against World War I and advocating against counter-imperialist and hegemonic involvement that, of course, led to the deaths of countless civilians and countless soldiers enlisted on their behalf. Contrast this legacy with Joe Biden, very easily the most odious potential 2020 candidate on the Democratic side, in a side that is filled with plenty of odious people, if we're being honest. He's derided Bernie Sanders for his focus on class struggle, saying, I don't think that 500 billionaires are the reason we're in trouble. That's actually precisely both the reason, in many respects structurally and economically, and the precise reflection of all of the ways that we are in profound trouble. In 2020, we need policies that challenge the economic system that has ravaged the planet, not just cover up its worst excesses. And with no one running on the overthrow of the capitalist system just yet, we must understand the difference between reforms that candidates, whether they be Booker or Biden, will push for and what non-reformist reforms offer. And this even implicates some of Elizabeth Warren's ideas, although not her brilliant idea on the public manufacturing of drugs. That is a brilliant non-reformist reform. Reform allows the system to continue by mitigating some of the most egregious aspects of capitalism. It masks the problem rather than solving it. And capitalists, of course, find ways of subverting these reforms. Now, again, in the real world, these reforms are huge. They make a massive difference in people's lives, and we should support them. And they also enlarge people's sense of what is possible and what they should expect. But we also see that whether it was the neoliberal backlash that broke up the labor social democratic consensus of the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in the United States and Western Europe, or the fascist calumny that we see in Brazil today, even the deepest and most successful reforms in a capitalist context will always be threatened by those very same forces. So as an example, U.S. labor laws can ban child labor and other horrific labor conditions. Major U.S. companies just go overseas where these rules are not enforced and practice their exploitation there. We can look at the contrast between the idea of, which we should, banning McDonald's and other fast food industries from forcing their employees to sign NDAs. Now, of course, we should do that. We need to do that. But what about providing every single American full and complete health care and helping liberate them from jobs like fast food industry jobs? So Elizabeth Warren is no Joe Biden. Her approach of managed capitalism will be buffeted in a late capitalist world with a shrinking pie and aggressively globalized and technology-fueled economy. A managed capitalism is still capitalism. As long as the corporation is organized in a way that maximizes profits for shareholders and owners, labor will always be squeezed. And in times of downturn, the working class is always first to carry the burden of austerity. We need to take the lessons from Eugene Debs. In his past, he not only was a radical socialist in America, he was a radical socialist inside the Socialist Party. Socialist conservatives were more apt to compromise than Debs. The radicals who he associated with wanted to overthrow capitalism, while the conservatives wanted to end corruption and make the system more efficient. The conservative socialists wanted to expel members who did not participate in elections and those who favored sabotaging industry to further class struggle. Debs and other radicals not only opposed those measures, but also embraced immigrants in their shared labor struggle versus playing to compromise in that area. Eventually, radicals defeated the conservatives, and Debs led the socialist ticket to its best ever performance in 1912. Debs is Bernie Sanders' hero. And in Bernie Sanders, you can hear, in spite of an incredibly moderate agenda, you can still hear the fundamental uninterrupted tradition of a class critique of American politics, which stands alone. It stands in sharp contrast, and it also more closely synchronizes with the necessary global corollaries that we're going to need, whether it be Jeremy Corbyn in the UK or other potential left governments taking the helms internationally, because this will be a global project. We need to remake the playing field and stop only treating the systems. Post-capitalist politics is the best and only fundamental way of treating the emergency of global fascism, of Trump, of the barbarism of our moment, and of creating a world that will actually work for all. We got to follow in Eugene Debs' footsteps to do that. And we will talk more about this with Bhaskar, but that is the fundamental distinction. And we can make that in a way where I'll say again, I like Elizabeth Warren. I will oppose dishonest, misogynistic attacks on her. But she is not making an argument and a policy set that is in alignment with the severity of times. Neither is Bernie Sanders completely. Of course not. But the fundamental etchings of a class politic and a reclaiming and a broader decommodification of the economy, he not only is doing, but has been doing for decades, going back to the 1970s. Guys, you want to jump in on this?
I just, sorry. I have to say that when we're thinking about 2020, I think talking about Debs is so important, because we really need to understand that not only is there a great American tradition of opposition to capitalism, we're talking about an American tradition that was very radical and pointed in its critiques of this system. Right. And we are, as you said, at a moment where, the world is at threat. And the only way that we're going to be able to beat the challenges that we face is to address the fundamental cause of them, which is capitalism. And understanding how we can fight that without, an overall grand, mass movement is going to be by taking as much power from the capitalist system as possible away from it. And that is something like, universal health care. That decommodifies a massive part of the American economy. And that's something that is tangible and is important. And when people start to experience that, it's going to weaken capitalist power. That's why, they've worked so hard creating the moderate version, which is like the democratic, strategy toward healthcare. Right. And that's where the real social struggle needs to be right now, is to be articulating the difference between those two things. Because Obamacare is something that is better than, just a pure private healthcare system, but it's not as good as universal healthcare. And it very much, secures the power of certain interests, financial interests in our economy. Definitely. And making those points clear to people is going to give us more power and to strengthen us going forward than just, making sort of simple arguments about, okay, well, is this better than the worst case scenario?
And
right?
Healthcare is an area where she's really good. She's an early co-sponsor on Medicare for All. So we take that and we say, this is an area where Bernie and Warren, I trust more than the other candidates on healthcare, even ones who've embraced the right position, which is great. But I trust them more. The next question then is, what's the next layer of decommodification, whether it be housing, or as an example, what extent to which are you willing to do, as an example, implement like the Black Lives Matter program on policing or prison issues? You take those, you acknowledge it. We should totally acknowledge Elizabeth Warren. She has a very good position on Medicare for all. Bernie has a leading position on it. And she had staked out a great position on publicly manufacturing drugs. And so what are the next steps? That's the way to go about it. But this broader sense of you need to decommodify large swaths of the economy. You can't, because even a reformist capitalist project in a global context can be very difficult.
Because, I mean, this is the point, just, one last thing is like on the reformist strategy, right? When we're talking about Biden, so Biden was saying, what are his economic strategies to deal with inequality in this country? He listed ending non-disclosure agreements, right? Well,
Right.
Certainly that's an excess of capitalist power. Certainly it's absurd, and certainly it's used to suppress wages. But that's not the cause of
That's
why
not the
wages are
cause.
low.
Right.
And the point is that NDA, this issue did not exist throughout capitalism. It was just a new way, a different way for them to exert their power over working people, right? And it's like one of these things where, if we focus so much on these like minor issues, we're never going to get to the root of it. And it's just going to be a Band-Aid over a very, very bad sore that needs to be treated.
And frankly, why the rhetoric and the bully pulpit actually really does matter. The fact that Bernie does frame this as, in fact, the millionaires, the billionaires, the oligarchs, versus some type of disruption in American meritocracy tradition, which is actually my biggest problem in some respects with Warren, is a huge rhetorical difference for cueing how people understand politics. Matt. Oh, man.
There's an
You don't
Orwell
get a
quote.
Lech quote?
I
Damn.
can't find it on the internet, but there's an Orwell quote that basically says it's pointless to attempt to protect capitalism when fascism's in power. Basically, because capitalism really protecting itself.
Right.
And that's sort of how I feel with Warren versus Bernie. Is like generally, I think it is sort of zero sum in the sense of you take power away from capitalists by decommodifying things, and
Right.
everything like that makes the playing field a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, anyway.
No, that's exactly it. Also, the quote you're looking for wasn't George Orwell. I'm familiar with it. It's Morgan Freeman.
Oh,
you'll
right.
find it.
I always get those.
Yeah, that was. I saw that on Facebook the other day. All right, let's get to the shout out. DJ Danarchy, the sound genius behind the Michael Brooks Show Sonic Experience. Song that, despite my larger strategic objections, always makes me think deplatforming kind of works. The Michael Brooks Show shout out song. Shout out goes to the nation of Haiti, which celebrated its Independence Day on New Year's. I want to play this clip for you from, I think the account is Haitian Business on YouTube, but it touches briefly on the Haitian Revolution, misconceptions about Haiti, and this distinct, important place in our lives.
But there's a lot of mystery and there's a lot of misconceptions about Haiti, because what we're never told is that Haiti is the only nation where a slave population rose up and took over.
The African people on the island fought all the largest armies of the world at the time and won over each one of them. Whooped the Spaniards, beat up the French, knocked down the British.
In this new documentary film, we're going to discuss how this little tiny nation of Africans defeated some of the biggest Western powers in the world to gain their independence in 1804.
Frederick Douglass declared of the Haitian Revolution, "We should not forget the freedom that you and I enjoyed today, that the freedom that 800,000 colored people enjoyed in the British West Indies, the freedom that has come to the colored race the world over is largely due to the brave stand taken by the black sons of Haiti. When they struck for freedom, they struck for the freedom of every black man in the world. Toussaint Louverture, after being captured and exiled by the French, cut down in,
quote.
so sorry,
That's a
overthrowing
different
me in you have cut down in Santo Domingo only the trunk of the tree of liberty. It will spring up again from the roots, for they are numerous and deep. CLR James has, of course, in Black Jacobins, one of the most important treatments of the Haitian Revolution, and one that's so brilliant because it doesn't fall either into the Eurocentric, racist, totalizing narratives or into essentialism. And in fact, he inverts the argument to say that the Haitian Revolution is the fullest expression of the sentiments that were expressed in the French Revolution. And the Haitian revolutionaries are the sort of like essential carriers of this distinct slave and black revolution, but also the most aggressive and expansionary impulses for human freedom in a global sense. So shout out to Haiti. A lot more content coming out as well, dealing with everything from U.S. policy there to the protected status for Haitians in the United States. A lot to deal with, but we must also just focus on the tremendous positive of that country. I also think that montage that they use was sparking a lot of Nation of Islam Obama content in my
Looks
head.
like a good documentary.
Yeah, it sure does, white boy. Sure does. They might not have had the one true living God, but they sure didn't know how to decapitate a fucking white person. And conversely, I could also see a lot of sort of YouTube snowflakery. It's like, wait, why didn't they have a dialogue with their slave masters?
The good thing about slave masters
Yeah.
is you can just kill them.
That's
That's
a great
what
thing.
Sherman found out.
Yeah.
Like people like it actually.
Yeah, they like it. It's a super clarifying debate. They said, to quote Comtown, "Sargon my dick," to the slave masters, as I attempt to synthesize all of those jokes with that one great episode title from Comtown. Let's actually, you know what? Let's do the update first, if you don't mind. We'll just pivot right into it. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been an uprising in Sudan. And the uprising has a great deal to do with both labor and youth movements. And this is a piece that came out in Africa as a country a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to quote from it briefly. When we talk about the governance in Sudan, the focus is usually limited to the incompetence and corruption of the ruling party, yet the opposition National Ummah Party, NUP, is equally distrusted due to its regular alliances with the regime and, moreover, its lack of vision and plan to address the country's problems and drive meaningful change. And, of course, a lot of these meaningful changes have to do not only with some of the very brutal social repression and religious conservatism of Sudan, but, of course, the macroeconomic policies stretching back to those implemented by the IMF in the 70s and 80s, quoting one more time. The economic liberalization per the IMF framework was implemented, rapidly resulting in the wholesale privatization. The government sold publicly owned enterprises and companies across sectors such as transportation, communications, and agriculture through corrupt procedures that benefited party affiliates. And this was the Islamic movement that governed from the mid-70s to the 80s. So this is the global pattern, and the global resistance is also occurring. I'm going to play a brief clip now from an Al Jazeera appearance from a very persuasive and energized youth activist in Sudan, and you'll get a sense of it right now.
Hajouj Kuka, a member of Girifna, a nonviolent resistance movement in Sudan. Welcome to the program. Hajouj, let me start with you. So President al-Bashir first is promising real reforms, and then he's calling these protesters traitors. What does that say to you about what he will be willing to do going forward?
I mean, at this point, especially with yesterday, like we're coming out of this great high. This was the best, the strongest nonviolent protest we had ever. And we're really excited. So at this point, we don't even want to hear from President Omar al-Bashir, and we know that he has nothing to offer us. So at this point, we just want him gone, and we want to talk about what is next.
So there you have it. We will continue to report on that situation, and potentially, obviously we'll be doing a lot more with Milton Al-Amadi soon, but maybe specifically on Sudan as well. We will be continuing on that. Now, we follow, obviously, Brazil on this show. And I want to, as I always say, please go and read the work of our friends over at Brazil Wire to understand what's going on there, the context of the U.S. policy with regards to the broader reversal of the pink tide, and specifically U.S. foreign policy with regards to the grotesque lawfare that targeted Lula and the coup that took Dilma Rousseff out of power. Now, the fascist Brazilian president, and again, neo-fascism was coined in the 1970s to specifically describe the Brazilian military junta that Jair Bolsonaro was a captain in and who he praises regularly, and his only criticism is that they didn't kill enough, was inaugurated president and promised to overturn socialism and political correctness in a bizarre, embarrassing, and, of course, fascistic speech. Now, let's pull these quotes up, these tweets up first. The first tweet, I want to give you just a sense of what Bolsonaro has done in a day, the first couple of days of being in power there. First, Mike Pompeo was there for the inauguration, where he openly threatened, at least indirectly, Venezuela. Their Wall Street Journal endorsed this. The Economist praises him with reservation. The agribusiness sector in Brazil is on board, and all of Western capital is as well. Let's be quite clear about who and what U.S. foreign policy and U.S. corporations are supporting. Here's what he's done on just day one. This is from Victor Poogi. For those following at home, extinguished the Food Security Council. Under President Lula and the Workers' Party, hunger was eliminated in Brazil. Not reduced, eliminated. Now the Food Security Council has been eliminated. He handed over control of Amazon protection and indigenous rights to the agribusiness lobby. He removed LGBT people from human rights protection policies and set the minimum wage at a lower value than was approved by Congress. Now, of course, the big things that what Western capital is excited about are the second and the fourth thing on that list. They probably like the first thing too, and I bet they're concerned about the potential PR headache of the savage abuse that will be released on LGBT citizens. But of course, they don't care and never believe their protests to the contrary. In fact, their attitude is best exemplified by this next tweet that we'll put up now, Nikki Haley. Now, Nikki Haley, of course, is one of the most obscene, disgusting figures in American and global politics, a far-right extremist Republican, and someone who has carried water for Trump every step of the way as his ambassador to the UN, supported all manner of obscene U.S. foreign policies and abuses abroad by any type of ally government imaginable. But of course, because we have a relentlessly moronic media culture, there's plenty of people that are still sort of have fantasies of her rectitude, and especially now that she's retired as UN ambassador, although I do predict she will be Trump's running mate instead of Pence in 2020. Here's what she had to say about the new fascist regime in Brazil. And in a weird way, it's quite honest. Congratulations to Brazil's new president, Bolsonaro. It's great to have another U.S.-friendly leader in South America who will join the fight against dictatorships in Venezuela and Cuba, who clearly understand the danger of China's expanding influence in the region. Now, of course, in some ways, that's very honest. There's no concern for human well-being. It's profoundly ironic that she would talk about dictatorships when Bolsonaro allies have bills in parliament to ban protests and are combing people's social media accounts. Now, I don't ever lie about problems with regard to human rights in Venezuela and Cuba, but I'm also not going to lie about their incredible social achievements that they've also achieved at times, particularly Cuba. Now, in the Workers' Party, you in fact had a Democratic Party that respected all of those traditions that people like Nikki Haley pay lip service to, who also achieved great social good. But because they wouldn't bend over to every single last drop for U.S. interests, monsters like Nikki Haley embrace fascism. Also, quick side point. Some of you who have what I would say is just a tremendously one-dimensional understanding of things are upset with me for wanting the U.S. forces to stay in a way that protects the Kurds in Rojava, and I certainly do. I oppose all imperialisms, U.S., Turkish, Chinese, Russian, whoever. And conversely, I want to say, if Chinese presence in Latin America helps counteract U.S. hegemonic ambitions and coups and potentially even invasions, great. That's a good thing. And I say this as a profound critic of the People's Republic. Now, there's a tremendous movement energy in Brazil. The Workers' Party still has many members of parliament. The landless movement and others have already overthrown one dictatorship and have done tremendous work over the years, even though, of course, they face tremendous threat and violence. But the real spirit of resistance in Brazil is incredibly strong, and here we'll play a clip of a sense of that. Now, of course, as has been pointed out, if in and I forget who did this, so forgive me, I think it was Brian Pitts, said if in Bolivia or Venezuela, the lead opposition candidate, who was a former successful president who led in all the polls, was put in jail, and then the prosecutor who put him in jail without any evidence became the justice minister for Morales or Maduro, we all know what a big nightmare scenario that would be in U.S. media. Of course, here it's completely ignored, which is precisely, though, to the T what happened to Lula. In a complete grotesque miscarriage of justice, which, as I always say, echoing Noam Chomsky, makes him the most important political prisoner of the world today. And here were people marching on his behalf in Curitiba during New Year's Day. This is a report we'll play a little bit of from Michael Fox, the World News Network.
They rallied outside the prison where former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been held since April. Lula led all of the polls heading into the elections, but he was barred from running by the country's top electoral court due to a controversial corruption conviction, which people here say was just the means of keeping him from returning to power. Katia Garcia is a professor who traveled from Brasilia for the demonstrations. We can't forget that this is a coup that we've been confronting in Brazil. It's been a coup d'etat since 2016, and we're resisting. They locked Lula up because they knew that without a doubt, at 3 p.m. today, he would have been sworn in as president. Lula and his imprisonment remain a symbol for progressive forces in Brazil. A vigil has been ongoing since the former president was jailed 270 days ago. They need to free us, because with Lula in jail, the people are in jail.
Lula Livre. We'll keep on that on all fronts. Okay, guys. Now let's talk about why you should become a patron of the Michael Brooks Show. And the number one reason is because it's great and we're doing a fantastic job, and it's true. It's really true. I mean, honestly, the amount of content that you get as a patron and the amount of histories, primers that we've put together covering everything from the illicit history of why we don't have single-payer universal health care in the United States to the transition out of apartheid South Africa to not enough human rights in an unequal world. We have a really full-scale political education, I would say. And in addition to that, on the post game, there's a tremendous amount of fun and clips and calls and Discord questions and banter, and of course the infamous Gulag segment. And, you know, this show, which we put out and is a huge amount of work too. And of course, your being a patron allows this main show that's available to everybody to happen. Which is also still kind of the meat of it. So you get 2-to-1 content, and then you sustain this show, which of course we want to get to as many people as possible. I don't think it's not some type of conspiracy. It's not some type of like Dave Rubin whining, but YouTube is being bizarrely bullshit about monetizing our channel. And I can say that just objectively on the metrics. We've hit like
we've blown
far surpassed, right? We've totally blown through every single thing that they've asked for, and they've not monetized us for bizarre reasons that make no sense.
That they're very opaque about. And we've gone through 3 different times of, you know, can you monetize us? And they apparently go through and look manually and then they give us some sort of explanation like duplicate videos, which we're not really sure what that means because there's no one to really ask. There's no recourse.
Right.
So we're basically, the YouTube page is kind of a loss leader, but luckily we're at a point where we can do it. But if you are one of these, if you're just a YouTube watcher and you enjoy the product on YouTube, and especially the clips, this is your moment to feel a little bit guilty for free riding, because if you want us to continue building this out, we're gonna need to get the money from somewhere, if not from YouTube.
Absolutely, and we do, because in addition to growing the show, we want to build as broad. We want to be part of broadening out the left ecosystem on YouTube as much as possible. So look, patreon.com/TMBS. This Sunday for patrons, we are debuting our first TMBS think tank session, where the crew talks issues and strategy of the day. It's not going to, it's going to be once every several, but it's a new flavor because we're always trying to innovate and add to what we do. We're really excited about that. We're more than halfway sold out, and the new year provides you an opportunity to come see us at the Bell House in Brooklyn, February 1st. It's the first TMBS live show. Obviously, we're incredibly excited about this. Alona Minkowski is going to be there. Bhaskar Sunkara is going to be there. Trevor Beaulieu, T of Champagne Sharks, is going to be there. And, of course, all of us. Mike Racine and I are filming some type of pre-sketch. It's going to be incredibly fun. I don't know if we have that up on screen. Yeah, you can go right to the Bell House and still get your tickets. I don't know. I mean, I'm not, as I say, we're over halfway. I've never done this before, so people tell me, and I have actually noticed, we never totally fell off, but there's definitely been a little bit of an uptick again in the past couple of days, and sometimes people are like, actually, it just seriously accelerates again. So if we went back to like the rate we were selling at it in the very beginning, this will be gone like really soon. So
and that lineup is basically leftist, Coachella.
That is, that's exactly
or
right.
Glastonbury, I don't know, whatever your favorite is, but get after it, folks.
Come February 1st, leftist Glastonbury.
Like, I'm one of the small names on the bottom of the Glastonbury thing, and
never small,
I'm still, me. So
that's there you go. Exactly. Of course, Griscom is. There's a lot of "I'm still me" here energy in the studio.
Me and Griscom are like the indie bands that like just got their first Pitchfork review.
Oh man, I remember those days myself, guys. It was the fucking Wild West, being in the background doing voices for Cedar. All right, one other thing, which I still do, of course. All right, one other thing that I really want to do. Nomiki Konst. She's running for public advocate in New York City. We're going to talk about her campaign on Tuesday. And look, she's running on all of the right issues. She's running on the public housing crisis in this city. She's running on taxing the oligarchic corporate wealth of this city to fund free public transportation. She's serious about oversight of policing, of race, of police violence issues in the NYPD, which are still profoundly persistent in this city. She opposes the Amazon scam brought to you by Cuomo and de Blasio, and she's incredibly serious about liberating Puerto Rico from our colonial relationship with it, which is both specifically connected to New York through all of the relationships between Puerto Rico and New York through that community, but also, all too often, Joe Crowley, Scumbag Joe, as an example, very happy to, go to a Puerto Rican Day Parade, but actually took money from some of the very same vulture financial interests, pillaging, screwing, robbing, impoverishing Puerto Rico right now. Now, Miki's on point with all of it and very committed to the DSA agenda. So what I want you to do is go give her some federally matching fund, or some locally matching funds. Contribute to her campaign. We have the link up there right now. I've been tweeting it out. It's I can't read it from this angle, but if somebody could, but we need to make sure that, wait, is that the signatures or I thought this was just okay, excuse me. I thought there was one to contribute to her. So we'll do that on Tuesday. But this is equally, certainly profoundly important. This link to make sure her name is on the ballot, and that link is, what is it? Nomiki.
So nomikikonst.com. I think if you find her website, I think it says secure.nomikikonst.com. We'll put it in the
okay, perfect. We need to get people like that elected to the local level. And in New York City, Public Advocate has about a $4 million budget. It's been the pathway for Bill de Blasio to mayor, for Tish James to attorney general. And we need to start putting for real left people in that pipeline. So very important. All right. I think it's time for, and I'm liking this new concept actually of a pitchfork review as a new way to fuck with Griscom. Matt, let's compose a pitchfork review of his gem segments. And then we need to bring, what the hell happened to Regulate with Matt Leck?
Oh. Well, it kind
I
of
know
lost
we're doing a lot of those in the post game, but
kind of lost its fizzle after we can't play the music, but we'll see what happens. That was my main reason.
That did like live and die with the music. There has to be a chopped and screwed version of that.
Yeah. It's not even originally Warren G either.
No, it is.
It's originally like Kenny Loggins or something.
Is it Kenny Loggins?
Or it's one of those smooth
Kenny Loggins adjacent.
Yeah.
David Griscom, Economic Minute.
Yeah.
Go.
Well, let's talk about 2019. I just want to start on a little positive news. In 2019, 5.3 million workers got a raise. That came after minimum wage hikes across the country. Many of them won through hard-fought battles, the fight for 15, making sure that workers can get dignity. So that is certainly no laughing matter to the people who now have a little bit more room, a little bit more money in their pocket between all of these massive bills and the rising cost of living. But it's just one of those things that we have to remember. It still is not enough. The U.S. Census Bureau just came out with just one statistic that blew my mind recently. 7.5 million Californians are in poverty. And if we remember anything, the U.S. measure for poverty is so low. So if you're counted as a poor person in this country, you're really in danger and in a lot of trouble. And across the state of California, even though we saw wage increases, we also saw the Chamber of Commerce brag that they beat every single one of what they call the job killer bills. Basically, these are bills that help give people dignity at work, make sure that people can get paid time off, things like that. So the capitalists still have tremendous power across the country, and they are lobbying to prevent these very important moves in wage increases and in reformed labor laws from happening. And we have to continue the fight. I think it's also, and also don't forget what happened in D.C., where you had overwhelming referendum that increased the wage for tipped workers, and the D.C. City Council just completely backed down on that. Right. So there's a lot of fighting to be done.
It completely overrode the democratic will in a essentially legislative coup on behalf of business.
100%. So we have to be prepared to fight, and just a couple more things. This is going to be an interesting year for Uber and Lyft. In the gig economy, because both of these companies are very likely to go public. And something that a lot of people don't know about these companies is they are massively unprofitable. Uber has been down $1 billion almost every quarter. Mm-hmm. And when they move from privately owned to publicly owned, there's going to be a lot more pressure to squeeze workers. And it's
also accelerate driverless cars,
exactly, and to automate. What we saw was exciting that was going on in the UK, and we talked about that a little bit with the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruling in favor of workers. But we're going to be seeing a lot of labor issues.
They were
employees of Uber, meaning that they need to be paid benefits and minimum wage and things like that.
Because the company calls these people that work for them full time essentially freelancers.
Exactly, which is complete nonsense.
Right, as a scheme to keep from paying.
And I mean, the whole thing is a scheme basically is to extract money from a system that's been going for a long time, which is cars and taxis and things like that. So what we're going to be seeing right now in the next year or so is there's going to be a lot more pressure downward on a group of people that already have a lot of pressure from Uber and Lyft to extract profits. So there's going to be a lot of important fights that are happening in 2019. And one last thing that I read just on my way over here that I wanted to share, the median price of a Manhattan apartment has fallen below $1 million for the first time in 3 years, according to a survey of sales in the final months of 2018. Basically, what's happening is real estate agents are reporting that there is a glut of high-rise, luxury apartments.
The luxury bullshit.
And people aren't buying them anymore because most of the people, we've talked about this before, most of these apartments are empty. They're bought as investments from foreigners for the most part, very wealthy people. And as people are getting more and more nervous about the state of the U.S. economy, primarily like the financial sector, the next couple of years, there's been less and less interest in renting out these properties.
Money here.
Yeah, and parking money here.
Right.
So we're going to be seeing also a major shift in rental markets in the U.S., or at least a significant downturn in a market that has just been so hot and has really pushed prices up into astronomical levels. So what we're going to be seeing again is the question of what are we going to do with all of these empty apartments when there's a housing crisis in this city?
What we're going to do is we're going to house them with homeless people and
Yeah,
reclaim them as public goods.
I still think I love what Jeremy Corbyn said about seizing apartments that people aren't living in.
100%.
So 2019, there's going to be a lot that's happening. There's a lot of fights to be involved in, and we have to be ever aware of what's going on. We have to pay attention to what's going on in the financial markets, because that is where people are starting to make their plans for how they are going to interact with labor. So we talk about the wage question, we talk about the rental question, and we need to be prepared to win these fights and to organize around them. And 2019 is going to be a good year for us, I think.
Yes, sir. And yeah, Matt, follow up on that.
This reminds me of a friend of the show he's been on, Lee Carter, Virginia. He's like the AOC of Virginia, but he's actually pretty he's more to the left, I think.
No.
His
Lee
bona
Carter's
fides are there.
Excellent state assembly in Virginia, or Senate, or state
let's
assembly.
see what he says here.
The House of Delegates.
House of Delegates
right,
in
okay.
Virginia, DSA, excellent socialist.
He's great. You should definitely follow him on Twitter if you
follow him on Twitter. Listen back to our interview if you haven't yet.
So another delegate, he quote tweeted the other delegate, Nick Freitas, saying, starting off reports wondering why there's so much poverty is absurd. Poverty is poverty is a natural state of human beings. Maybe try focusing on what creates wealth instead of just redistributing it. And Lee Carter says, this is what reminded me from Griscom's statement. There are 11 empty houses for every homeless person in Virginia, and 40% of the U.S. food production rots while thousands don't know where their next meal will come from. The continued existence of poverty isn't natural. It's a deliberate policy choice made by people in power.
That's it.
And what's the reason for that? It's the contradiction between use value, using a home to live in it, and exchange value. So that's why houses stay empty. That's why apartments stay empty in this city, is because there's more value for certain people to leave it empty as an investment opportunity than to house people. That's a system problem, not a natural state of affairs.
And it's not a question, right? And that's precisely it. And that's why it has nothing to do with the personal morality of people in the real estate industry in New York. Although it is, by and large, an extremely
they're very immoral people.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong.
Well,
they're total scumbags. But that's not the point.
Yeah, exactly.
The point is the systemic incentive structure.
I think we should talk about this in the future, but it's one of those things also with like gentrification. It's like people aren't getting pushed out of their homes because some people aren't like acting appropriately when they move into neighborhoods. People are being pushed out of their homes because very predatory landlords and like capital's forcing them, right? And it's one of those things where we got to be very clear about our narratives on
and
these
systemically
questions.
Unfair distribution.
Exactly.
Right. And right, precisely. And it's all tied up in everything that we have to understand. And of course, in terms of race and class, the engine of those things are very specifically economic ones, including the cultural exploitation and expeditions. The early process of New York regentrification of actually some of these real estate companies like seeding certain types of young white people to go into certain neighborhoods is almost like early scouts and type of literally colonial expedition.
Exactly. The incentive is behind it. Gentrification is certainly a thing, but we should talk about the source of why.
No, but the source is not right. The source is not like, oh, this is annoying that people like coffee shops here. First of all, everybody likes coffee shops and bars and shit. That's not a specific social or racial class. It actually becomes kind of weirdly reverse condescending to like, I know plenty of people from different economic and racial backgrounds that enjoy a nice cup of coffee and a good beer on a nice day. That's not the point. The point is a complete predatory upturning of people's homes and communities because of a profit lust that is completely, I mean, we need to broadly decommodify it, but it isn't even restrained by any type of rigorous legislation, like at the very least rent controls. So, I mean, that's the fundamental driver, no doubt. Bhaskar is going to be here in a few minutes. So we have, is that him? Is he already knocking? David, go check. I like that. Serve your other function on the show. Like that. This is real grassroots media shit right here. You do an economic analysis, then you let a guest in. There he is. Are you with your... I am on air. No, it's fine. You can do that. You can do that. Is this your spiffy shirt from Trinidad that you tweeted about?
I couldn't get it. My girlfriend didn't let me.
What?
Yeah.
Don't ever let her do that.
Yeah, you know
if you promise me a...
You know why? You know why?
Why?
It's because she doesn't like my aunt, and she thinks her food is bullshit.
You do know you're on mic, right?
I know.
Okay.
I want her to know.
Okay, so Bhaskar is acknowledging that his girlfriend's deep hatred of a member of his family motivated his sartorial choices.
My white girlfriend's hatred of my beautiful brown aunt.
His white girlfriend's hatred of his beautiful brown aunt. And I'm quoting Bhaskar, but I could just as easily be quoting myself. That sounds like something I would say. You got some mayo in your brain. You got mayo. Mayo, Bhaskar. Let's watch that Haiti documentary. All right, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Bhaskar Sunkara on The Michael Brooks Show. Welcome back to The Michael Brooks Show, first show of 2019. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Joining us now is my friend, Crew, founder and publisher of Jacqueline Magazine and the Tribune. Bhaskar Sunkara. Bhaskar, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I heard you off mic about how your girlfriend cucked you into disrespecting your auntie.
She just didn't like the shirt that I was going to wear here, but it's okay. I had a weird day. I actually woke up at 5 a.m. because the second issue of Tribune just hit the printer.
Congratulations.
And I needed to get it in by noon UK time, and that's very early US time. Then I worked from 5 a.m. to 3. Then I had a beer. Then I took a nap. Then I woke up. Then I ran an errand. And then I came here all disheveled.
And you had a conflict about the sartorial, because you had promised
I kind of agreed.
a spiffy shirt from Trinidad, and I feel robbed, frankly.
Yeah. No, it's not a good shirt. But, I feel like it would have been a good shirt if I was a, middle-aged Trinidadian man from the late 80s.
See, I specifically, put on, a nice tee, but a hoodie. Not because I've been dressing I've been suiting up sometimes on this show.
Really?
And I specifically didn't do that so you wouldn't feel like
what
too
level of
much.
suit are you wearing? Are you Nation of Islam level or are you?
It's always Nation of Islam level, brother.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yeah. Actually, I was
talking Nation of Islam when his girlfriend lets him disrespect his auntie.
Yeah. It's
You're out of your fucking mind, Bhaskar.
It's not right. It's not right.
Yeah, it's goddamn it's not right. You know what's really not right is that
pork.
You don't eat pork, but you got swine in your mind. You don't eat pork, but you date pork. Allahu Akbar. By the way, Bhaskara's girlfriend's very cool.
And she also is not a listener of this show.
Oh, okay, great. Let me get back to the routine. Yeah. You talk to pork, you live with pork, but you don't eat it? Depends.
She only listens to majority of pork when Sam's on.
Oh, I'm going to do... All right, so basically I'm just going to do impressions of a... Bhaskar, your girlfriend fucking sucks. We gotta look. Everybody complains about Jacobin, but have you seen this guy's girlfriend? I mean, it's fucking sad. That is how meta... Like how meta this shit could get. It's like, it's a Michael Brooks show. What do you do? He did a... right-wing Mandela impression that is rusty, so it almost sounds like Kissinger, and he insulted my girlfriend for 10 minutes. So I do have a serious question for you, though.
Yes.
How did you feel about the first game of the season with the Nuggets just completely wiping out the Knicks? Buddy?
No, actually, it was a very competitive
game. It was
not
first game in 2019.
The Knicks were ahead through 3 quarters. Were very competitive.
So is that even more depressing?
Good. No, it's not depressing at all because the Knicks are trying to lose games. They just want to lose them the right way because we want draft picks, right? So we want to lose them the right way.
Right.
Playing young people.
Let's take a second of this. Let's watch a little bit of losing in the right way here.
I mean, these are all Nikola Jokic.
Now the screen set by Jokic for Murray. Nuggets working around.
Not bad.
Yeah, it's kind of lazy by Max. He was just kind of chilling.
Yeah, he was really lazy the way he played that.
Would you get a tattoo if you were an NBA player?
Yes. I'm kind of surprised they haven't already gotten a tattoo in real life, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. Most people I know have tattoos, but I just can't commit to that kind of permanence.
It just seems like a waste of money, you know?
Yeah. Really?
I mean, you get the cheap ones.
Tell me it's a waste of money when you see me with this Rasta flag on my shoulder that I'm getting ready to put.
You know those cheap ones you get at the fair? It costs you 25 cents.
You're just deflecting from watching this beatdown.
You know, if you don't have a shower, you can wear that shit for like a week, 2 weeks.
All right, before some asshole, yeah, before we lose the stream.
I mean, we're kind of like, we're just kind of fatalistic about it.
Well, I mean, YouTube is just total assholes. I almost feel like we should just like
we should just
do a
like
show of just like
the pirate hour.
We just like stream games, music, football, like. Do some mystery science theater over Rachel Maddow and just say fuck you.
Did you ever see that one guy?
Holy shit, that sounds good actually.
That does actually sound really good.
This one guy set up as if he was playing, I think, FIFA on Twitch or Pro Evolution Soccer. So he had himself, in the foreground, sort of green screened in front of the gameplay. Except it wasn't a video game. He was just streaming like an actual internet, like a match.
That's awesome.
And like they got to get by the censors, made it look like he was gaming it. I think that's
I love that
energy we need to bring into 2000.
See, that's actually the best of that old, like, I know stuff like the culture jamming stuff was not sufficient for like a big political project, but in those like little like sort of like small undermining of like Twitch as an example, I like that kind of move.
Yeah, I think Culture Jam was mostly good for just, awkward white people in the 90s trying to, meet and have sex with strangers. But it had no political purpose whatsoever.
Culture jamming.
Yeah, like Adbusters. It's still around, actually.
Is Adbusters really still around?
Yeah, it's still around. They're still doing okay, actually.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's
that
some
really
joy.
does seem of such a different time.
There's joy in consumerism now, right? So there's joy in kind of like you're looking at a watch and you're like, damn, that's a nice watch. Like, I'm kind of a tennis fan. I used to hate Roger Federer. Now I like him because he stuck around for
Roger Federer?
Wait, now he's so great. He stuck around for long enough. I like him.
He's amazing.
But like a Roger Federer watch ad is like classy, cool. There's an aesthetic pleasure in it. And Adbusters runs like watch ads, except it's kind of like anti-consumerist.
No, they did very good ads.
But
they always did great anti-consumerist ads.
But the aesthetic joy isn't the left-wing politics; it's the consumerism.
Right.
So it's like if Jacobin could run watch ads, I think we'd be on some next level stuff.
Well, why aren't we talking about that, dude?
I don't know.
That's clearly a right place for TMBS Jacobin collaboration.
I know you have a lot of listeners out there in the watch industry.
I mean, we've got a classy listening base, and by the way, you'll be meeting a lot of them soon in real life.
Yeah,
so
February
1st.
Oh, so February 1st.
Yeah, remember, I'll text you. Mind your P's and Q's.
Yeah. Speaking of my girlfriend, last time
let's speak on her. That's right.
That's actually my anniversary. I'm missing for this.
Oh,
February 1st.
Hold on, is my board
February
up?
1st actually? Yeah.
Wait. I'm sorry. I was a little slow in the draw there. This is where I really want to give you the type
7
of credit.
years. Yeah, 7 years. A long time. A big anniversary I'm missing.
Shofar. For missing an anniversary to do our show.
Yeah.
That's exactly the type of attitude that I appreciate.
Our first date was actually a Knicks Milwaukee Bucks game. It was by accident.
Does she like? Is she like a legit NBA fan?
No, we were just having a mediocre date. We were bored and we were walking past MSG, so I scalped tickets.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's a great way to. That's a great way to save the date.
Yep.
That's good. Well done, Bhaskar.
Yeah. I used to be handsome, charismatic. Now I'm just, I'm just trying to get by.
Going on
I'm just trying to get by with money and power.
Jesus. We'll do an intervention after the show. Do you have the stamina to talk about the Cuban Revolution for a second? 60th anniversary.
Well, let's do it.
Well, hit me.
So,
I guess, no, I'll set it up a little bit more. I mean, well, first of all, are you, I feel like there's 3 things that you need to hit, right? And I'll just for setting it up purpose, agree, disagree, reject, whatever. I feel like, okay, one is acknowledging that there are a lot of great accomplishments that are real, that are tangible, healthcare, education, but also the overthrowing of Batista, also the surviving for that amount of time, and also some of the international efforts, everything from, like guerrilla efforts in the 60s and 70s, but also now more like, doctors in Venezuela or Brazil and now possibly in Mexico. Then there's the U.S. piece of just like the sort of just abusive U.S. foreign policy, and in some ways the nature of the government's secondary. And then I think third, is also being honest that of course there's been abuses in Cuba, and of course there's been excesses, and furthermore, most people who are like, Western, like Brooklynite socialists would totally not be used to or into some of the like restrictions they would experience if they lived in a Cuban context, and you should be honest about that. Anyway, I think those are like three things to put on the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bottom line is that Cuba is a sign that even bad socialism can sometimes accomplish more than a functioning capitalist society can accomplish, right? So we live in a society today with millions of people who are uninsured, with high rates of infant mortality and things like that for a developed country, with, in a city like New York, 30,000 plus homeless people.
Right.
And in Cuba, there's an old Cuban saying, and it went something like, in the world, I don't know what the exact amount, like 190 million people will, children will sleep on the street tonight. None of them will be Cuban. And of course that wasn't completely true, because I'm sure there were some Cuban kids sleeping on the streets in Miami. But in Cuba it was probably true, right?
Right.
But at the same time, and also, I've been to Cuba before. In the streets of Havana, it's incredibly safe. There's no slums. There's none of the things that I'm used to seeing in, let's say, Kingston, Jamaica, or that I've seen. My family's Trinidadian, so Port of Spain. Trinidad, and Trinidad, of course, is not a regular Caribbean island. It's kind of a petro state. We have a
lot more money flowing in Trinidad than other Caribbean states, but the very serious inequalities.
And so, in other words, Cuba to me is a society that definitely has, if not classes in the classic capitalist sense, it has castes, right? It does have layers. If you're a bureaucrat, your life outcome, if the bureaucrat's son or daughter, is going to be a lot different than if you're born, poor in Havana.
Right.
But at the very least, it's a ruling bureaucracy that gets its legitimacy from giving people health care and from giving them education.
Right.
And that's very different than the way the legitimacy is derived from other countries in the world.
Right.
Especially countries in the third world. And there's a lot of caveats you could apply. Like, for example, I think the embargo is kind of overstated as a reason for Cuban development lagging behind, in that up until the late 80s, when Soviet subsidies for sugar started dwindling down, the weight of Soviet subsidies probably outweighed the impact of the embargo. That's an empirical question.
No, I think that's almost certainly the case, though, from my understanding. Though that being said, I guess the counter argument to that would be that's still subsidies being shipped in from like across the world versus actual economic encirclement from like a massive hegemon 90 miles away from where you are.
Yeah, and there was
who's also constantly trying to like assassinate.
Yeah, and the 90s are proof there was legitimacy. I mean, there's no way a government like that could have stood up. And
exactly. And
if you think that a authoritarian government can just by strength of its military alone stand up to popular pressure, I mean, I think the irony is that this anti-communist, anti-totalitarian argument actually does a disservice to the actual people suffering under dictatorships, because people suffering under dictatorships can rise up and can make change.
Definitely.
And surely, a country like East Germany was, for a Eastern Bloc state, relatively prosperous, had a very strong military, second in the Eastern Bloc to the Soviet Union. And it collapsed overnight, because when the popular legitimacy goes, the government goes. And in Cuba, the popular legitimacy never really went.
Right.
And I think as Americans, our primary goal should be to reject sanctions, reject the embargo, reject some of the propaganda against Cuba. But if down the road movements emerge fighting for the free civil liberties that we enjoy in the U.S.,
right.
Then I think we have to also support those movements. Because if we think it's okay for you to start a podcast and be on the radio without getting government approval, and for me to do the same with a magazine, Obviously, we're on the left, but we should think that a government shouldn't stand in the way of people doing the same thing in Cuba. But
right, and that's not what we're
yeah.
obviously not what we're talking about when we talk about socialism. I think the only caveat to add to that is, and this is just the complexity and the reality. So as an example, like we uncritically would support like liberation movements in Africa as an example that might get funding from, China or the Soviet Union, which we would have plenty of criticisms of. So conversely, I could certainly support movements against other authoritarian regimes that might also get some support from the United States. Rojava is like sort of the prime example now. That being said, teasing out what those movements in Cuba will look like that are like organic versus, just sort of like ongoing U.S. interference, that's going to be the trick. But I totally agree with you philosophically.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is going to be difficult. I think the bottom line is that the Cuban moment has gone. There was a time up until I think we can look back now and we would say, what was the peak of state socialism? What was the peak of the left? And we might date it to the late 60s, early 70s. But it wasn't apparent at the time. At the time, it might have seemed like the mid to late 70s was the peak, maybe even 1979. So you had the victories ongoing in Angola. You have apartheid trying to becoming shaky in South Africa. You have the coup in Afghanistan, the left-wing coup in Afghanistan, which is called the Sour Revolution, which happened in April 1978. You have all this advance in the third world. You're about to have the revolution or the coup, left-wing coup in Grenada. Right. And it's not clear
and
whether...
even Burkina Faso is not that far out.
Yes, exactly.
With Thomas Sankara.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I would say Cuba right now, though, is isolated. It's in a different period. It's a different moment. It's trying to keep hold of what's good in its revolution. Right. But it's going down the Sino-Vietnamese model of having to bring in market development, having to bring in foreign investment, in such a way that it's going to lose certain aspects of the Cuban system that is good. So I think that in the end, if Cuba develops in such a way that there is increasing inequalities and gaps between rich and the new kind of growing rich and people who are well connected in Cuba and people who are poor and suffering, people who are, there's prostitution in Cuba today, and that's often a source for a lot of people for like hard currency, for getting U.S. dollars and an economy that's split between a dollarized
and also
economy
a
major
so that was a source of legitimacy too in the beginning of the revolution. Like we got rid of that as like this prime site of like this of exploitation of like the U.S. backed mafia state under Batista.
But I think we have to trust in the fact that when injustices grow, people will be able to resist it and will stand up to it, and reject the idea that, there's a million Cubans out there just waiting for Americans to come in. Because I think that's one thing that the majority of Cubans can agree on, which is that they could, handle their own affairs without Big Brother and D.C.
100%.
Looking in.
Perfect. Yeah. And
did you have early affinities to the Cuban Revolution when you were like, I don't know, just getting politicized, or when you were in high school, college?
I did sort of, but I had because I got politicized pretty young. So that's like, late 90s, like early aughts. I was, and this is maybe in a good way, but there's all these limits, but I was basically just sort of like Noam Chomsky-ized. And so one thing that he was pretty good about, I mean, he's obviously made his mistakes like everybody else, but he didn't make like a place like Cuba like a site of fantasy. So I think if anything, I was maybe, and I was fascinated obviously by the Cubans, but I think that I read some about Castro, and then very quickly it was sort of, I don't know. I think I was just too early on introduced to the problems, and I think that maybe my path was almost the opposite way of being like, okay, I'm glad that I wasn't idealistic about it. I'm glad that I didn't have like delusions of grandeur about Cuba. But actually, this is also like an incredibly, important moment, and in some ways a successful experiment. And even where it's been a failure, it was like a noble failure. But, I also have, I have like attitude about that even in some ways for like, you know, some totally bougie reactionary things. Like I think you can make cases that totally separate from policy, JFK or Obama opened up important things culturally, right? And so at certain points in my life, the way I'd look at politics, it would just purely be like, oh, well, JFK was a Cold Warrior who was fairly right-wing on domestic policy and actually pretty poor on civil rights and backed McCarthy, and Obama was a bank bailout drone warrior, all of which is true. But I think like the fuller picture also is, well, there was actually some really culturally significant touchstones of both of these presidencies. So
yeah, I mean, I could see that with Obama. I think JFK just, I don't know.
You don't think JFK opened up cultural space in the United States?
No,
especially I don't see it that way.
I have to say, I'm not sure. Obama, I could give you. I could give a lot of ground to Obama
definitely
now.
Because, but that's just because of, I mean, just purely on American white supremacy alone. First black president with a middle name Hussein is a significant thing, and also I would say that some of the immigration elements.
And he won Indiana. I think that's.
He won.
I mean, how the fuck did that happen?
Because of his voice.
Yeah,
that's the great thing about Obama. He's the most Midwestern. I mean that whole impression. That's why it's so funny. It's like devil. Sounds like he should be saying like, "You want some extra mayo with that?"
Yeah, because there's no such thing as a Hawaii accent, right? Like,
I think there's like actual like
out of the
I know what you mean.
Lines,
No,
yeah.
I don't think. I mean, the best I could think it would be some sort of like off-brand Cali accent, right?
Yeah. I never been there. I feel like that's one place I might skip between now and my death. Because it takes
a really interesting place to want to skip.
No, it just takes a long time to get there. If we lived in California, then sure, but New York, it's like shit.
By the way, that was the most. I was just talking with. By the way, everybody subscribe to Woke Bros, which we're going to have you on soon to talk Knicks on. But Waz and I were talking about in the latest episode how Ebro Darden from Hot 97 just took over as head of. I don't even remember, but something in I think. I forget what the fucking title is, but something at Apple Music, right? Like a big position on artist development at Apple Music, or curation at Apple Music. And we were just like, Ebro is half black, half Jewish, which is like the ultimate media machine. And I was thinking, the way you did that with the Hawaii thing was one of the most Jewish things ever. It's a flight, and it's so long, and then apparently it's so beautiful, but you're already so jet lagged, you couldn't possibly enjoy it.
I'm a short, neurotic socialist from New York. What can I say?
Right. See, because we don't take race isn't a real thing, so we get that it's all ascriptive identities. And ascriptive identities, you are fucking Jewish, my friend.
Yeah.
There's definitely some Jews running around like California that are like, dude, like, why is Bhaskar so worried about the flight? Let's play a little bit of a clip. We're going to talk about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Real quick, the way we titled tonight's show is, how do we title it?
The difference between Bernie and Warren and everyone else.
And that frame I like, and I think you agree with me, that there's significant and real differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and why if Bernie Sanders gets in, we will certainly support him. And Warren's sort of like actual progressive liberalism is the next step above the rest of the Democratic field. Would you kind of share that perspective?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's play a little bit of our announcement video, and I'll throw to you on this.
In our country, if you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to be able to take care of yourself and the people you love. That's a fundamental promise of America. A promise that should be true for everyone. Growing up in Oklahoma, that promise came through for me and my family. After my older brothers joined the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack and couldn't work. My mom found a minimum wage job at Sears, and that job saved our house and our family. My daddy ended up as a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, and a senator. We got a real opportunity to build something. Working families today face a lot tougher path than my family did. And families of color face a path that is steeper and rockier, a path made even harder by the impact of generations of discrimination. I've spent my career getting to the bottom of why America's promise works for some families, But others who work just as hard slip through the cracks into disaster. And what I found is terrifying. These aren't cracks that families are falling into, they're traps. America's middle class is under attack. How do we get here? Billionaires and big corporations decided they wanted more of the pie. And they enlisted politicians to cut them a fatter slice. They crippled unions so no one could stop them.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
Dismantled the financial rules meant to keep us safe after the Great Depression, and cut their own taxes so they paid less than their secretaries and janitors.
It's time to write the rules for the middle class.
After Wall Street crashed our economy in 2008.
So I like some of that for sure. I actually like the way I thought some of the intergenerational and race wealth stuff was a very important point. And I think Marissa Baradaran, who we have on this show, I think she's at least advised Warren in the past. She might currently be advising her, and you could see her really important work in that. I also have some real big problems with the framing of this. But first, can you tell me, like, what do you like? What is the substantive difference here that actually matters beyond just like the branding of we're Sanders people versus Warren people?
Well, I think the video was great. You know, I think a lot of that was great. I would say the substantive difference is that Warren has always been more someone who's been a tinkerer trying to create fairer rules, whereas Sanders has consistently challenged the system itself. And I think that Sanders has a politicization in the socialist movement that has allowed him to see society as a conflict between those who have power and privilege and wealth and those who don't. And the people who have power and privilege and wealth don't want to share. They realize that their power, privilege, and wealth comes from the subordination of other people who don't have those things. And I think it's very clear in his worldview where he says something like, you know, you're working hard and you deserve more. And the reason why you don't have enough is because millionaires and billionaires are benefiting from the state that you're in. There's a little bit of that in Warren. I think over the course of what she's been doing in her career, she's been focusing on financial regulation. She's been an advocate for a lot of these good reforms in Congress, but she wasn't enough of an advocate for the kind of class militant approach of Sanders that, you know, she didn't endorse Sanders before Massachusetts, and, you know, she could have swung Massachusetts potentially because it was a 1%. I don't know the exact amount, but
it was like about a 3% loss.
Yeah, it was a
3% spread.
It was a close, you know,
it was
election in Massachusetts.
Yes, definitely, yes.
So I think that there are certain things that make me wary. It's this approach. I mean, she was a Republican, as everyone knows, up until, you know, the early 2000s, late 90s. So I have some wariness. I think the bottom line is that Sanders brought something a little bit different to the table. He was able to reach people currently alienated. He was able to speak to anger. I think there's no reason for Warren supporters and Sanders supporters to attack each other, but you could see the way in which Warren could potentially be used as a cudgel to attack Sanders.
Right.
Even though Warren and Warren supporters wouldn't necessarily want that. I think we should just be aware of that, right? I think we might be in a situation where, you know, a lot of people in the Democratic establishment would love to have Warren or Sanders be 2 and 3 respectively, and to get their, you know, Biden or their candidate of choice in first. So I think we need to be clear that, you know, there isn't one Democratic Party. There are different Democratic parties. And we also need to be very wary about the part of the Democratic policy elite that supported Obama in 2008 and 2012 that are now migrating to the Warren campaign.
Yep.
And not blame Warren for it. Like, you would take help, you can take expertise when it's coming to you.
Of course.
But yeah, I'm wary of all these things. I think Sanders is a far more desirable choice. I think even if you're a Warren supporter, you should want a strong, robust Sanders campaign to the left of Warren. And if you're worried about it getting acrimonious, think about Sanders' rhetoric against Hillary Clinton in the debates. Sanders wasn't acrimonious against a candidate that really deserved people to be acrimonious against her. So, you know, obviously
precisely.
wouldn't be against, you know, her, a friend and colleague. So, and I would imagine that Warren thinks more highly of Sanders than a lot of Warren supporters now.
I think
Sanders,
that's
you know?
another really funny irony of it is I think clearly, well, and I will be fair in this regard. I think there are some people who, you know, in their support for Sanders, which I share, are guns blazing on her too early, and in some ways when it's sort of like scattershot and ineffective and not accurate, right? Like there's a more subtle case that we need to make here, and I think their relationship is as actually clearly two people who respect each other and collaborate. And I think a great irony, which we could read both ways. Now it benefits Sanders, but you know, 2016, I mean, every credible piece of reporting is that he was waiting for her to jump in the race and would have backed her vehemently and saw her as like the sort of stronger possible contender. She chose not to do it, and now he, of course, ran an incredible campaign and is still the most important progressive politician in the country. But those conditions were partially a result of, you know, again, you know, so, and I think it's very important both for Sanders people to recognize that, hey, this guy had enough respect for her that he was willing to throw all chips in for her in 16. So know that. And then Warren people, the reason Bernie's in pole position is because she didn't run, he did, and he was enormously successful and created an entirely new playing field. So let's be real about it in both senses.
Yeah, I think that is quite important. And Sanders made a point of mentioning that he was waiting on Warren in 2016 in his Our Revolution book, which came out right after the 2016 election. So I think that is important. I mean, as far as I think, though, it is very telling, though, that a lot of the existing media elite, and let me tell you, these people do collude, right? I mean, I know it sounds like a conspiracy. It sounds like some Trumpian thing. Yeah, you know.
Should we start feeding, like, how great would it be, though? Maybe not actually, if Bernie was, it's collusion. They're colluding. By the way, so what happened was, blah, 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 blah. She colluded. Pocahontas steps back from the mic like Trump.
I actually like.
The arms in the
I
air.
actually think they won in 2020 meme thing. Trump did. It was pretty funny.
Hilarious. That was really funny. All right, but back to your serious point.
I mean, but I
love how we did like 10 minutes.
It does
It
does work that way, though. I mean, like I'm on the listservs. I'm on the things. People, it isn't so much hey, we're gonna do this plan. It's, hey, I'm working on this. Hey, don't you think this? Hey, look, I couldn't include this in my story. Take a look at this. Hey, talk to this person.
Right.
Like, you know, that's the way it works. And, you know, if anyone is a journalist who's listening to this, who's supporting Bernie Sanders, send me an email. We'll collude too.
Oh, yeah,
this is just the way it works.
We will definitely collude for Bernie without a doubt. I just want us to collude. Like, I think that, like, okay, let's just disaggregate things here. I'll be really blunt about how I see the field right now. And I'm not going to make I think it's way too early to make the electability argument. And I think there's a scenario where almost anybody could beat Trump. And I think there's a scenario where very few people could beat Trump. And I think Bernie would still be one of those people. But that being said, here's how I see it. I think Joe Biden could definitely beat Trump just as a candidate and performer. I think he's a totally odious politician who we should throw all chips into making sure he's not the nominee for everything from race and prisons to Anita Hill to the bankruptcy bill, which he wrote, which is literally the reason that we know who Elizabeth Warren is, because actually of her great work against that credit card legislation that Biden signed. In addition to Iraq, in addition to cutting Social Security, I mean, this is just someone we should strongly oppose as a right-wing Democrat, even though he's a likable guy. Then I think frankly, bluntly speaking, the Gen X crop, which I like that frame that Mike from PA put it, Gillibrand, Booker, and Harris, I have huge question marks ideologically. I'm glad they've been pushed in the right direction, but I have big question marks for obvious reasons about where their politics actually are. And I have huge question marks on just their ability to win a campaign and have the type of skill sets in terms of like charisma to win a national race. I have these are neither, you know, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders style like substance, and they're neither are they anywhere like Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. Okay, you just got charisma. Maybe Beto has that. Maybe that's his lane. But I just think that, so I won't hit them as hard as Biden because they've moved in the right direction on major issues like Medicare for all, but I have just a fundamental skepticism of them ideologically and performance-wise. But that being said, like, I want the debate with Warren to be on the right terms. And so I will keep reiterating, at least as of now, I like her, I respect her, I think there's significant differences between her and the rest of the field. And I think that there are these fundamentally different ideological underpinnings that actually matter for how we get out of our predicament.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, except I would say that, I'm all for scorched earth, anything that isn't Sanders and neutral on Warren. We'll try to...
No, I think that's where we'll get.
Yeah.
That's where we'll get. That's where we'll get. But the only distinction I'm trying to draw is Beto and Biden have not made their pilgrimage. So those three.
At least Biden has accomplished something, though. Right?
Biden has.
This guy's been a heartbeat from the presidency. Beto.
No, I
don't know. He's accomplished
not
less than someone who got a nice superlative in their high school yearbook.
Born into an El Paso landlord family, but I think that. But I guess I agree with you. But that being said, Booker, Harris, and Gillibrand have co-sponsored Medicare for all. Booker did, the baby bonds legislation. Particularly, Booker has done the right thing on drug war stuff. Like, they have at least made some of the substantive concessions that I think, like, we in the left want. So it doesn't look good for us, for the people who have been at least trying. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, I still don't really buy it because I know who you are politically, but I appreciate that you're moving in the right direction, and I'm not. Whereas Biden and Beto haven't done anything for that, so we can hit them pretty hard.
Well, we may believe though that we appreciate the fact that Booker has endorsed this or this has happened, but I think part of the goal of what we're doing is also to you put a taint around certain candidates. You put a cloud. I don't know this candidate's. I don't know much about them, but I know there's something that isn't right.
Right.
Because there is something that isn't right about Booker if you really get into his record.
I mean, the hedge funds and what he did to the schools. I mean, it's just
and Newark now has a good mayor.
Newark now is a teacher union backed left mayor, the son of Amiri Baraka.
Exactly.
People should read up on that.
Someone who used to hang out in Maoist reading groups and stuff. I know people who was reading Mao with him. Actually, I haven't revealed this yet.
Well, Cory Booker was reading the stress reduction manual put out by the HR department of General Dynamics or something. Like, he was reading something like that.
Or The Art of the Deal.
Or The Art of the Deal.
Another great
business. But so, okay, one thing I have one person who's not part of he's not a colluder. Unfortunately, I'm forgetting his name, but a patron. So, of course, the most important people in the world. And, I don't have much time for these kind of arguments, to be blunt, but I'll just put it out there for you. He's got the, okay, this is all well and dandy, but the reality is that, first of all, both Warren and Sanders will be up against a huge amount of institutional resistance for even just the most modest of reforms. The actual policy profile on domestic issues are not really that different. And Elizabeth Warren is better at, I don't know if I buy this, but accept the argument, which I actually should say I don't buy, but stipulate the argument that she's better at staffing, she's more institutionally aware, she'll have less innate resistance from the Democratic Congress, and therefore, unfortunately, we're bringing back that old phrase, she'll be more likely to, quote-unquote, get stuff done. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I find the staffing argument kind of ridiculous because you're like, oh, this person's better at staffing. What positions have she staffed before, right?
Right.
She staffed the office of a senator in Massachusetts, a state, by the way, that in polls she's polling third. Can you imagine Bernie Sanders polling third in Vermont?
Fuck no, you can't.
She doesn't even have statewide name recognition the way Bernie Sanders has. Right. And Bernie Sanders already has national name recognition. I mean, Bernie Sanders' staff managed to get, 13 million votes. I think that's,
so what about, though, the broader, their president and she wheels out a progressive agenda, and there's
there's constraints. There's constraints to what any leader will be able to accomplish, given the way the world is and the way the space for the left is so limited. But I would ask the person, would you rather a Gordon Brown, a Ed Miliband, or a Jeremy Corbyn in office in the Labour Party?
Right.
Because they're going to face a lot of the same constraints. They're going to face a hostile parliamentary Labour Party. They're going to fail structural constraints. Like capitalism is different than it was before. It might be able to accommodate less of our demands as easily as it was in the immediate post-war period, when social democracy was advancing across the world, and there was third world, national liberation movements, and the Soviet Union was still around, or whatever else. So I would say that things are consider Sanders or Warren as running minority governments.
Right.
They have a small core of supporters. It might be 20% of Congress. It might be less. That's going to be their core backers. And they're going to have to convince a majority of Democrats to get behind their positions in order to pass legislation.
Right.
So would you rather someone running this kind of government be someone who's further left, who's then compromising a little bit to try to build a core, or would you rather someone closer to the center who's compromising to build this majority?
Right.
And also, it's not just a matter of passing legislation.
Right.
I think a key task for the left today is not so much writing legislation so much as change the conditions in which legislation is written. Right. And I think that's the key thing that Sanders can do differently than Warren, can change these background conditions that might make something possible. Just look at AOC, who I think, by the way, will make an incredibly compelling presidential candidate. We can look forward to that.
Well, no, Republicans nailed her, though. They've got this incredible Oppo research that apparently she was like a human being that enjoyed herself in high school.
Yeah, and went to Yorktown Heights.
Yeah, that's fucking devastating. I mean, I will play that in the postgame, but I saw they put out this video of like her like dancing in some high school video or something, and it's like, I actually legitimately, maybe because I really am like in a super fucking spiritual hippie place right now post New Year's, but like I clip that, but I got sad for the person that's. I was like, how fucking friendless and depressing is your life that you think that this is like a negative,
and
right?
Also,
like literally just like a human being like having fun is like a gut punch. Like what?
And also, the Republicans keep saying, oh, she claims that she was this kid from the Bronx, but she was in Yorktown Heights because her mother moved her there, and she worked hard, and she got good grades, and she used to give herself a white name. I'm like, does that even appeal to your base? Like, who are you actually trying to win over with this appeal? Because, poor brown and black people are aspirational. And conservative white people would be like, yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Well, I mean, that's a product of the age right now, is that Republicans, along with a lot of other people, I mean, they will, especially Republicans, they'll wheel out the most crude reductionist identity politics imaginable. I mean, that's a big part of their game. But I also just want to say, as another side note to that, I forget who said this, but I mean, somebody else said this, so I'll at least give the ether credit. But a Venn diagram between people tweeting out that video of her dancing and the people who like defended Brett Kavanaugh is going to be just obscene, right? Like the devastating thing you did in high school was dance in a video, not fucking, assaulting somebody.
But did she write about it on her calendar?
Yeah, right.
She didn't have that discipline. I'm not sure
she didn't have that discipline. She wasn't. Yeah, she should have shotgunned a beer and written it down. But anyways, no, I think you're right. I think obviously AOC, and I always put in Rashida Tlaib, and I mean I think there's an incredible.
Rashida does not get enough credit.
She doesn't. She should get a lot of credit. She's fucking dope.
And Roe too.
Roe's really good, and I think also, look, I don't want to get into Pago, but I understand why they did what they did, though I disagree with it. McGovern, Pocan, and Jayapal are also, like, you've got a contingent, and of course Barbara Lee, and obviously Bernie. You have like an actual contingent there now of legitimately good legislators, not just sort of like center-left-ish people that you can occasionally root for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that...
And Ilhan Omar, I would add to that as well.
But what we'll see, though, is that Warren will be the favorite for a little bit when the comparison is Warren versus Sanders. Now, when Warren starts attacking others in the Democratic field, when she starts challenging their policies, when the debates start, maybe the table will turn on Warren. And how will she respond to these attacks?
Right.
If she adopts a combative approach, then, yeah, you're right. People like me, if we keep adopting this very cautious or hostile posture towards Warren, will look silly. And if she capitulates, if she tones down her attacks, if she's critical of Bernie, if she says things like she said on CNBC the other week that says, I'm a capitalist, I believe in the free market, system.
Right.
Now, I'm sure even a lot of people who are liberals, a lot of people who are Democrats, fundamentally believe in the free market system, so-called, who believe in things that I don't believe in. But to go out there and say it actually means that you're supporting corporate power as it exists today.
That's,
it means
right.
Yeah.
No, I love that you made that distinction, because it's like, look, in reality, I understand that most people, and this is another task of us as socialists, is like, no, we're not just talking about social democracy. We're not just talking about regulation. We're talking about democratizing the economy, and that is not on most people's political radar yet. But conversely, that doesn't, when they say that on CNBC, that's not don't worry, I don't want to completely get rid of markets. That's a reaffirmation that even though I'm a reformist, I'm still okay with the basic sort of like corporate order of America. Mm-hmm. And that means something different. And that is a fundamental problem. And, and that was another distinction with Bernie, right? Like, I know, again, people on the left could be dissatisfied with some of his compromising answers, but he still basically said that in 2016. Like, I'm not a capitalist in the sense that you're asking it, because I really I don't want that level of concentration of power, period. And he's still the only one saying that. Mm-hmm. So maybe are you talking about really like also just actually a bully pulpit effect, right?
Yes,
yeah.
I think that is important, but also like, is Warren on picket lines? Like, has she, Bernie tied in his New York primary. People kept saying, he was a big disaster in New York. He didn't get that many votes. He lost by a pretty big margin. But if you actually look what he was doing when he was campaigning, he was supporting the Verizon strike. Yeah. He was doing a bunch of other stuff that is what a left-wing politician does. So it's, it's not just personality politics. For me, it's that I trust Bernie. So I will admit that if I hear something about Bernie, hear something about his campaign, my first instinct is going to be, all right, I know this guy, I trust this guy. Yep. He gets the benefit of the doubt. That's my knee-jerk reaction. I'll admit to that bias.
Yep.
But with Warren, let's see. I'm wary of the people around her more so than I'm wary of her. And I want to see how she relates to a Sanders candidacy, if Sanders does, in fact, run. And then we'll see. I honestly do think Sanders will be more competitive and more compelling. I think Warren's getting a lot of attention now because she announced first, and there's been a big gap. But I do not believe she'll be that competitive. And if she isn't that competitive, that means that a lot of her supporters will flock to Sanders, hopefully. In fact, her supporters might not flock anywhere because a lot of the game of these primaries is about name recognition and perceptions of electability. Right. And there is a degree of randomness to it.
Right.
But we'll see how it is. But the bottom line is there's going to be a very noxious and ugly media battle between the two camps. And we need to separate what's battles between a bunch of people who want jobs in the next administration or a bunch of reporters who want access, and what's issues of substance, and we need to be separate, somewhat aside of that.
No, I agree with that, and I think that's, and that's also just why I want to set I want to touch two other things really quickly on this before we go to the post game. But I just want to really center though, and I'm being honest. There's a lot. I like Elizabeth Warren. I think she has a tremendously admirable record on the issues she talks about. I think the fact that she proposed government production of generic drugs is amazing, and actually does have some of the significant decommodification implications. I think she was one of the first people that signed on to Medicare for All. I like this candidate.
She hedged on Medicare for All.
But I want to stipulate all of that because I think especially with her, and I know obviously this is going to make no difference for people, the type of disingenuous people we're talking about, but it's going to come to that point. I'm going to lay markers down every step of the way where, if she does come around and say hedge on Medicare for All, or well, my position on foreign policy is that Netanyahu should write our foreign policy or whatever, I'm going to criticize that robustly and contrast that with a far better Sanders policy. And if you come to me with any bullshit about like, that's not a woke take, I'm going to, maybe the first time I'll point you to a clip praising her for all of her excellent work. And then I'm never going to have that engagement again because it's fucking nonsense. And it's very clear with her because you couldn't, with Hillary Clinton, the attacks were disingenuous too. But for what it's worth, there wasn't much, it's like I could say, I recognize the historical nature of Hillary Clinton, and that's about it. I have a fundamentally different view of the world than she does. Warren, there's a lot I appreciate about her. There's a lot I respect about her. She's done a lot, and it's great, and I totally acknowledge that. And Bernie is my preferred candidate because I'm a democratic socialist, and now, let's get on the field and see how it shakes out.
And also, at some point, the villain becomes the hero. I mean, in that, Hillary Clinton... who doesn't feel a little bit bad for her, right?
Oh, now, totally.
Yeah, she worked really fucking hard.
Hating on Hillary Clinton
reason.
now is absolutely overkill, 100%.
Yeah.
But I'm talking in the most, in the with her era. I'm not talking the flip side, which is the first could have won, or at least front running woman presidential candidate in American history loses to this grotesque, obscene misogynist.
She's like J.R. Smith right after game one. You don't say a word, just kind of,
Oh no, I'm totally with you. We totally be classy about it. All right, and then just another distinction between Warren and Sanders. He's now light years ahead of her in terms of foreign policy. I would say that's also a really important thing that we can't just completely backburn her in the primary.
Yeah. I have vaguely heard that she is moving the right direction on foreign policy. I have no evidence of this. I've just heard this in email threads of people telling me to reevaluate Warren. But yeah, I think there is a fundamental difference in their worldviews. Let's just see how it plays out during the campaign.
And you think he can constitute as part of that quote unquote effectiveness argument? You're talking about. Basically, to if I could put words in your mouth, if I understand you correctly, if Sanders is elected, if Corbyn is elected, we will need a type of street organization, broader sort of engagement of politics in any number of ways in order to even have a prayer of passing any of that type of even reformist agenda, that it's going to look like just a massively higher level of political engagement. Basically,
we're going to need people who think about society in terms of class and who are trying to take power and privilege away from people who currently have it. And if Warren talks about this polarization, I think that's a good thing. If she talks about the rules of the game not being fair,
that's what I didn't
needing
like in
to
that
be
video.
fair,
yes,
then I think we have a problem. Because the problem isn't just distributional. It's not just a matter of things being unfair. If you made the rules of the game fair, you wouldn't have a game. Right. And I think that's a trick of capitalism. And obviously, we're not going to abolish it anytime soon. We're not going to abolish it under a Sanders administration. But I think with that understanding, we could fight for what's ours from people who have power and wealth. But I think
that Miliband versus Corbyn is actually a really interesting, because I'm a Miliband defender. I think he's a perfectly respectable modern social democratic
politician. What about his sandwich
politician.
eating?
Disgusting.
Yeah.
But he paved the way for Corbyn, and that's great. But I prefer Corbyn because I'm a democratic socialist. All right, we're gonna go to the post game. We've got a ton of sound and clips, and it's gonna be funny. Right wing rap is the best thing on earth. Become a patron. Patreon.com/TMBS. We continue to grow steadily. We always have this, the fall off in the beginning of the month sucks from declines and stuff like that. So first of all, people ask me, make sure that your information went through. And if you haven't done it yet, it's time. Patreon.com/TMBS, and see us live February 1st at the Bell House. Thanks, everybody. See you in the postgame.